There are several theories of why Donald Trump finally took the plunge and ran for president in the 2016 cycle. Yeah, ego is part of it, but then that's not saying a whole lot because anybody who thinks that they are fit to serve as leader of the free world, so to speak, what used to be the most powerful person on the face of the earth, not anymore, that's Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping, but third most powerful, if you prefer. Anybody who runs for that office who believes themselves fit to lead the country has got to have a pretty healthy ego, a high level of self-esteem. So that's not really all that noteworthy or remarkable. But building upon that, of course, Donald Trump has he's got Barack Obama's ego. Let's just put it that way. And the other thought, building upon that, was that, of course, and I certainly subscribe to this, I've been saying it for over a year, since June 15th of last year, that Donald Trump planned on, well, it's a combination of things. One, he wanted to prove that he could conquer the Republican Party. And also, he wanted to sabotage the GOP and ensure the election of his good, close personal friend, Hillary Rodham Clinton. But the problem with that theory, back when it was originally formulated, was that, oh, Trump's not going to be the GOP nominee. There's no way he could actually get nominated. So the thinking was that he'd jump in and he would stir up as much trouble and discord and chaos as he could, and then bow out before the votes actually started being cast in the primaries. And then, but he didn't. And then he actually became the front runner. Which, and again, this is one of those things where it just was so outside the box that it just, nobody took it seriously. There's no way a celebrity apprentice in the White House? Nah, nobody's going to take that seriously. Well, never underestimate the willingness of ignorant voters to be conned, swindled, bilked, played, hoodwinked. And Trump recognized the opportunity, unfocused, ignorant anger, and so, he took advantage of it. And he came out and he was himself and just told his marks what they wanted to hear, and he became the front runner. But the thinking was still that, well, he won't actually get the nomination. Once people start taking things seriously, he'll tail off. And in any normal year, with a sane electorate, that's exactly what would have happened, but it didn't. And of course, you had the usual, every 4 years, the conservative wing of the GOP splinters among multiple candidates, and then all those candidates take turns pounding each other with tire irons while the frontrunner cruises on to the nomination. Now, usually that benefits the GOP establishment, although this time Trump essentially is the GOP establishment candidate, and Trump supporters just are too stupid to figure it out. And so basically it's the same thing happened. I mean, the media, $2 billion of free media for Donald Trump. Why do you think that happened? Because the media wanted Donald Trump as the GOP nominee, just like they do every 4 years, to impose the weakest possible opponent for the Democrat nominee. And that's what happened again, in spades. And again, Trump supporters are just too addled by the Trump Kool-Aid to admit it. But the thinking was still, well, but he's got the nomination, he's conquered the GOP, so now he will tank it. He will tank the election and guarantee that Hillary Clinton is elected the 45th president of the United States. That one looks like it's right on the money, right on target. Because, of course, look at what Trump is doing. Look at what Trump has done since the conventions over the past month. He is creating a landslide of his own making, only not in his favor, as Jim Garrity wrote about this morning at nationalreview.com. Now, when Trump loses, he'll likely be one of the few candidates in history who only has himself to blame. And when Donald Trump suffers his big loss in November, it will go down as a true rarity in the history of modern American presidential politics, a self-inflicted landslide defeat. If the current polling is accurate, and all the polls are saying pretty much the same thing, Hillary Clinton is likely to win all the states Obama won twice, plus North Carolina. That would give her 347 electoral votes. She has a shot in Arizona, Georgia, Nebraska, Missouri, and Utah as well. Sweeping all of those states would give her 391 electoral votes, the highest electoral vote total for a presidential election winner since George H.W. Bush rang up 426 against Michael Dukakis 28 years ago. Now, the past two generations of American voters saw some epic landslides in presidential races. Democrat Lyndon Johnson beating Barry Goldwater in 1964, Republican Richard Nixon beating George McGovern in 1972, Republican Ronald Reagan beating Walter Mondale in 1984. But a Trump loss would likely be remembered quite differently from those one-sided contests. Only once since 1952 has a party kept control of the White House for 3 straight terms, the Republicans from 1980 to 1992. That third term is nearly impossible to lock up, even under circumstances more prosperous and peaceful than today's. Ask Richard Nixon, Gerald Ford, or Al Gore. Trump is taking on the second most unpopular nominee in recent polling history, Trump being the most unpopular, hint, hint, at a time of terrorist attacks on American soil, a growing menace overseas, and a depressed economy. I mean, in other words, the soil for GOP victory in 2016 is the most fertile probably since 1980, when Ronald Reagan overwhelmed Jimmy Carter. And Trump is still... we're going to get another Democrat president because of Donald Trump. Models of a generic Republican against a generic Democrat show a GOP win. That's that pendulum effect of the two-party system. Now, considering all the other factors, a Republican candidate shouldn't lose, not just by a wide margin, shouldn't lose at all. And any real, actual Republican wouldn't have. But Donald Trump's not really a Republican. Now, is he? I mean, it's not clear that Barry Goldwater, George McGovern, or Walter Mondale squandered political circumstances nearly so favorable. In fact, they didn't. Some have compared Trump's campaign and the strident, often personal criticism it's invited to Goldwater's effort in 1964. It's easy to picture the Clinton campaign recycling Johnson's infamous Daisy ad, which suggested that Goldwater's election would lead to nuclear war. It's even easier to picture Clinton's team repurposing the anti-Goldwater slogan, "In your guts, you know he's nuts," for use against Trump. Although the difference being in this case, in Trump's case, it would actually be true. Now, if Goldwater was a lunatic, he was the kind who somehow managed to hold it together long enough to reach the rank of Major General in the U.S. Air Force Reserves, flying 165 types of aircraft in his career. If Goldwater was a lunatic, he was that rare one who could write the philosophical treatise, The Conscience of a Conservative. Johnson and others very effectively caricatured Goldwater as a senatorial version of Slim Pickens riding the H-bomb in Dr. Strangelove, which helped cost him the election. But in actuality, he was a humble, gracious, deep thinker who worked extensively with members of both parties. In other words, Barry Goldwater was a serious professional politician and a genuine conservative. After President Kennedy's assassination, any Republican nominee would have had an enormously difficult task defeating Johnson, running on Kennedy's agenda with the public sympathy at his back. You rarely hear historians speculating that other GOP options in the 1964 primary, such as Nelson Rockefeller or James Rhodes, would have succeeded where Goldwater failed. Of course, James Rhodes went on to be War Machine and Iron Man sidekick. Just kidding. The caricature of McGovern's 1972 campaign was also so successful as to pass into history almost unchallenged. Acid, amnesty, and abortion. That could have been the Bernie Sanders campaign slogan. It was a phrase that originated with George McGovern's short-lived running mate, Thomas Eagleton. But McGovern, like Goldwater, contradicted the cartoon his opponents painted in some key ways. He was the passionately anti-war candidate who volunteered for the U.S. Army Air Forces a month after Pearl Harbor and flew 35 bombing missions over German-occupied Europe. So, yeah, he was a peacenik, but he had balls of this big, too. He was a known quantity in American politics by 1972, having been elected to the House 16 years earlier and the Senate 10 years earlier. His liberal agenda might have seemed extreme at the time, but no one doubted his sanity or temperament. William F. Buckley called him the single nicest human being I've ever met. If McGovern was an extremist, he was the kind of extremist who would work with colleagues for 2.5 decades in Congress, the kind of hardline ideologue who could somehow bring himself to vote for Gerald Ford and Robert Dole over Jimmy Carter and Walter Mondale in 1976. I did not know that, ladies and gentlemen. George McGovern voted for Gerald Ford in 1976. Bet you didn't know that. I certainly didn't. McGovern's campaign stumbled most notably by picking and then replacing the politically toxic Eagleton, but the chaos of the late 1960s and early 1970s undoubtedly put Americans in a mood for law and order. The Democrats' other options, Hubert Humphrey and Edmund Muskie, had just lost to Nixon 4 years earlier. Walter Mondale will be remembered for the worst electoral college defeat in American history. But in 1984, he was considered the safe choice for Democrats. He had been vice president, senator, and attorney general. He stood in what was then the relative center of the Democrat Party. He was a relatively unifying choice and was the front-runner throughout the primaries. His selection of Geraldine Ferraro as a running mate was bold and historic. Yeah, he did the unthinkably unwise, declaring in his acceptance speech at the convention that Mr. Reagan will raise taxes, and so will I. He won't tell you. I just did. No! But in the end, Mondale's defeat was less a reflection on him than on his opponent. In other words, Mondale didn't lose the '84 election. Ronald Reagan won it. Americans felt really good about where the country was in 1984, so they eagerly signed on for another 4 years of Reagan. Just like Bill Clinton got reelected in 1996. Same idea. The public perception was that the country was doing really well, so why change? Trump is quite different than Goldwater and McGovern, in that he goes out and confirms his opponent's caricature of him every single day. In fact, his opponents haven't even really caricatured him. Trump himself created his own image, and all his opponents are doing is citing it and otherwise getting out of the way and letting him run wild with it. Unlike those men in Mondale, he has no record, Trump that is, of votes in a legislative body or signature legislation, no military service outside of between his silk sheets, right? And few longtime allies in the national and state parties. He has high name recognition, but has never run for office before. And remember what I've always said about the presidency not being an entry-level job, but it's the only job his ego would allow him to pursue. A trait that his fans insisted was an advantage. We want outsiders. We don't want professional politicians. You want somebody who doesn't know what they're doing. Why is that a good thing? Let me cite the parallels, the analogies I've drawn with this before. If you needed open heart surgery, do you want a cardiac surgeon who has performed successfully 10,000 bypass operations? Or do you want to go down to the local garage and get Mr. Goodrich and take your chances, holding a book that says Open Heart Surgery for Dummies? If you were accused of first-degree murder falsely, if you were Sam Shepard, you've been accused of murdering your wife, and you need the best legal team that money can buy, who are you going to get? O.J. Simpson's dream team or Joe Pesci's character from My Cousin Vinny? You're damn right you're going to get O.J. Simpson's dream team. So why would anybody want for what used to be the most powerful job in the world, leader of the free world, why would you want to get somebody who didn't know what they were doing? It's rankled me. It just frustrated, aggravated me this entire cycle. And now we're headed for the inevitable result of it. Losing the third consecutive presidential election, handing the Democrats the White House for another 4 years. Congratulations, Trumplicans. I mean, Trump is erratic, imprecise, stupid, incoherent in his statements. He shows no interest in policy details and dismisses the need for campaign offices in swing states, for crying out loud. It's like I say, you know how Trump, you got to throw out all the rules when it comes to Trump. This is where the rules exact their revenge. This is where the rules strike back. Just because the Republican Party is a stupid party, emblematically proven, demonstrated by their nomination of Donald Trump, that doesn't mean that the entire country is going to follow that example, that horrible example. Looking back on previous historic presidential defeats, a confluence of factors made the losing candidate's task almost impossible. The economy, social changes, the national political environment, the electorate's appetite for change or lack thereof. When Trump loses, the explanation for 2016 will be much simpler. Even with the wind at his back and a deeply flawed opponent, he simply was not up to the task of winning over a majority of the American electorate, which is another way of saying the entire American electorate ain't drinking the Trump Kool-Aid. For once, in other words, it really will be the